Namaskar, a warm welcome to World News, an Indian perspective on All India Radio. This is VC Pramod and with me is Nishit Kumar, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines: India blocks 35 Pakistani YouTube channels and 2 websites for spreading anti-India fake and divisive content. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov meet in Geneva to discuss de-escalation in Ukraine. German frigate ban makes port call at Mumbai, signaling India-Germany partnership in the Indo-Pacific. Germany highlights fundamental differences with China on human rights in first virtual meeting between the 2 foreign ministers. Private offices allowed to function with up to 50% attendance in Delhi. Amar Jawan Jyoti flame at India Gate merged with flame at the National War Memorial in New Delhi. In badminton, PV Sindhu enters women's singles semi-finals of the Syed Modi International Tournament in Lucknow. And in cricket, South Africa beat India by 7 wickets in the second ODI at Boland Park in Paris. As the number of COVID-19 cases are rising fast in several parts of the country, we appeal to our listeners to be vigilant and get fully vaccinated and help others, including children between 15 and 18 years, get vaccinated. As the new Omicron variant of coronavirus is causing concern, please continue to follow the 3 simple steps to stay safe. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact the National Helpline number 011-2397-8046 and 1075. And now the news in detail. The Government of India has ordered the blocking of 35 YouTube-based news channels and 2 websites involved in spreading anti-India fake news in a coordinated manner over digital media. Besides these, 2 Twitter accounts, 2 Instagram accounts and 1 Facebook account have also been blocked by the government for their involvement in spreading a coordinated anti-India disinformation campaign over the internet. Secretary, Ministry of Information and Broadcasting Apurva Chandra said that the YouTube channels, websites and Twitter, Instagram and Facebook accounts were operating from Pakistan. He termed the content and information on these channels as toxic and totally against the sovereignty of the country. He said the ministry has issued the order in this regard on Thursday.
Our intelligence agencies are now alive to this issue. Last month we blocked about 20 YouTube channels. This month we have blocked about 35 YouTube channels. YouTube channels with 1 crore 20 lakh subscriber base, 130 crore views. Now since this process started, I am sure that more and more such channels will get blocked. Intelligence agencies are at work. We are at work. We will like that the people come up with their own this thing. They tell us that these are the channels which are toxic and which are against the country, and we will take action against those.
Mr. Chandra said that the recent action taken by the government follows the blocking of 20 YouTube channels and 2 websites in December 2021. The emergency powers under the IT Rules 2021 were first utilized to act against such anti-India fake news networks.
All these channels are based in Pakistan, totally baseless, totally content which has no sense at all, war of misinformation against the country, because this is a sort of information which is absolutely toxic, totally against the sovereignty of the country, and that is why we have used the provisions of the IT Act Section 69A to block these channels under the emergency provisions.
The mortal remains of 2 Indians killed in the Abu Dhabi blast on the 17th of January reached Amritsar Friday morning. According to reports, the 2 Indians have been identified as Hardev Singh and Hardeep Singh. A Pakistani national was also among the casualties, and all of them were staff of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. The attacks were claimed by Yemen's Houthi rebels. Sanjay Sudhir, India's ambassador to the United Arab Emirates, tweeted that the Indian embassy in Abu Dhabi completed all formalities for repatriation of the mortal remains. He highly appreciated the fullest support extended by the government of UAE and the ad hoc group. He added, earlier, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar expressed solidarity with the UAE in the face of such unacceptable acts in a phone call with Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan. The UAE on Monday condemned the Houthi attack in the capital Abu Dhabi that killed 3 civilians, including 2 Indians. Elsewhere, the UN Security Council unanimously condemned the deadly attacks on the Abu Dhabi by Yemen's Houthi rebels as heinous terrorist attacks and called to bring the perpetrators to justice. The members of the Security Council in a statement condemned in the strongest terms the heinous terrorist attacks in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates as well as in other sites in Saudi Arabia. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has expressed shock at the report of 4 Indian nationals, including an infant, losing their lives at the Canada-US border. In a tweet, the minister asked India's ambassadors in the 2 countries to urgently respond to the situation. India's ambassador to the USA, Taranjeet Singh Sandhu, said that they were in touch with the US authorities on their ongoing investigations.
A mild earthquake measuring 5.3 on the Richter scale jolted several parts of Bangladesh at 4:12 p.m. on Friday. According to the Bangladesh Met Department, the earthquake had its epicenter 352 kilometers east-southeast of Dhaka near the Myanmar-India border region. The earthquake tremors were felt in places like Chattogram, Bondarban, Dhaka and a few other areas of the country. No immediate report of damage to property or life has been reported so far. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met for talks in Geneva on Friday. The talk comes amidst increasingly strained relations between Washington and Moscow over Ukraine and NATO. According to reports, the talks ended with the 2 nations' top diplomats agreeing to keep working to ease tensions over Ukraine. The U.S. has promised a written response to Russian security demands next week. Russia has amassed tens of thousands of troops on the Ukrainian border. Russia denies any plans to invade Ukraine but demands security guarantees, including a permanent ban on the former Soviet country joining NATO. The NATO alliance, however, maintains that NATO follows an open-door policy and is open to any European nation willing to enter it and abide by its principles.
German naval frigate Bayern is making its port call in Mumbai from Friday. Speaking on the development, India's Foreign Secretary Mr. Harshvardhan Shringla said that he met the Chief of the Naval Staff of Germany, Vice Admiral K. Achim Schonbach, who is on a visit to India. In a statement, the Foreign Secretary said that the frigate's visit will be an important milestone in Germany's sustained and active engagement in the Indo-Pacific and will contribute towards reaffirming a free, open and rules-based Indo-Pacific. In his remarks at a symposium, Mr. Shringla welcomed the growing interest among India's European partners, including Germany, to intensify their engagement into the Indo-Pacific region. Mr. Shringla also invited Germany and other European partners to join India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. Prime Minister Modi had announced the initiative at the 14th East Asia Summit in Bangkok in 2019. Meanwhile, Chinese and German foreign ministers held their first virtual meeting on Friday. At the meeting, the new German foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, highlighted fundamental differences on human rights. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told his German counterpart, Annalena Baerbock, that the 2 countries had to lead the relationship between China and Europe. But Ms. Baerbock highlighted fundamental differences with China on human rights, signaling a possible change in approach under the new government. A statement released by her office after the meeting said that while close cooperation with China was important in many areas, such as tackling climate change and environmental policy, respect for international laws and rule-based international order was also needed. Ms. Baerbock has pledged to adopt a combination of dialogue and toughness in dealing with poaching. Last month, she called for an EU-wide import ban on goods made using forced labor, a practice Beijing denies in Xinjiang. China-EU relations have become increasingly tense, with the investment deal being put on hold last year following an exchange of sanctions over Xinjiang. Elsewhere, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz met U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Thursday. In a statement, the U.S. State Department said that they discussed the challenges posed by People's Republic of China and the shared determination to uphold universal values.
The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has stated that some 12,000 households have been affected by the volcanic eruption and tsunami that hit the islands of Tonga over the weekend. Around 60 to 70% of livestock rearing households have seen their animals perish, grazing land damaged and water supplies contaminated. After being closed for several days due to ash on the runway, the debris at the Fuamato International Airport has reportedly been cleared thanks to the tireless efforts of Tongan authorities and is now operational. Relief flights from New Zealand and Australia arrived on Thursday and a domestic flight departed for Haipai, confirming that the airport there was also operational. The volcanic eruption was the largest recorded in 30 years. A huge 20-kilometer high mushroom cloud of smoke and ash was followed by a tsunami, and the eruption was heard as far away as Australia and New Zealand. Meanwhile, private offices in Delhi have been allowed to function with up to 50% attendance. The Delhi Disaster Management Authority, DDMA, has issued an order in this regard advising them to stagger office timing, presence and quantum of staff. It has clarified that night curfew from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. every day and weekend curfew from 10 p.m. of Friday till 5 a.m. of subsequent Monday will remain in force in the national capital till further orders. Earlier, Delhi Lieutenant Governor Anil Baijal rejected the proposal of Delhi government to lift weekend curfew and odd-even scheme for shops and commercial establishments in the city in view of the COVID-19 situation. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on India-Sri Lanka ties and the road ahead. In conversation are Skand Ranjan Tayal, former diplomat, and Indrani Bagchi, a journalist.
Sri Lanka has been in the news for a while, at least in the last couple of weeks. We have watched the Sri Lankan economy become almost like a disaster zone, and they are facing the kind of an emergency situation that very few countries are at this point, but also very surprising for a country like Sri Lanka. On the one hand, in fact, India had to do an emergency bailout for the Sri Lankan economy just last week. The process was started with the visit of the Sri Lankan Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa back in December, and the discussions which started then culminated last week in an emergency bailout package by India for Sri Lanka. Mr. Skand Tayal, former Indian diplomat, how do you see what is happening in Sri Lanka?
Sri Lanka has been under this financial strain. Its foreign debt is about $45 billion, which is almost 60% of its GDP. And if we compare that with even a weak economy like Pakistan, their foreign debt is 40% of its GDP. India's is 20%. And in the last couple of years, the Sri Lankan economy has been very badly hit because a very major contributor to their economy was the tourism. And first, because of the Easter Sunday bombing of 21 April 2019, when 8 Muslim suicide bombers killed 269 innocent Christians there. And after that, because of this COVID, the tourism industry, hospitality industry has been very badly hit. And their exports have also been badly hit. And that has resulted in this foreign exchange crisis, and they were about to default on their loan payments. And that is why they requested India, and India has stepped in with very major support, almost $900 million as loan, currency swap of $400 million, and another 3-month deferment of $515 million. And 2 credit lines have been extended to $1.5 billion because Sri Lanka is short of both fuel and food. So our Indian Oil Corporation, etc., will supply fuel almost of $400 million on a deferred payment basis. So India is a friend of Sri Lanka, and there have been very intense discussions between the Sri Lankan government and Indian authorities, particularly between Foreign Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar and their finance minister as well as foreign ministers. Because as we recall, the relations between India and Sri Lanka under the Rajapaksa governments have not been very smooth, as Mahinda Rajapaksa, who is now Prime Minister and who was President from 2005 to 2015, went too close to China and tried to play China against India, and we all recall that history. But India is now put that behind us and has come to the assistance of Sri Lanka.
Do you really think we should put it behind us? Because, and I go back to the economic mismatch, there are 2 issues here. One is an economic mismanagement by successive Sri Lankan governments. It is not merely Rajapaksa, the Rajapaksas currently who are to blame also, because his predecessor Maitripala Sirisena also started out as being more independent-minded, but we saw in his tenure, Sri Lanka slipped deeper into debt to China. In fact, since they could not pay back the loan on Hambantota, it is Sirisena's government that gave a 99-year lease as equity share to the Chinese. which is the kind of debt trap diplomacy that the world has been warning about. But that apart, Mahinda Rajapaksa himself, earlier last year, he suddenly decided against the advice of his scientists and his policymakers that Sri Lanka should go organic in agriculture. Now, as we have seen other places that have gone completely organic, the cost of agriculture goes up, and they were looking at a food crisis. Not to speak of the fact that Sri Lanka had imported fertilizer, supposedly organic fertilizer from China, which turned out to be contaminated, and they couldn't use it. But the Chinese were not ready to either forgo the payment because they had supplied contaminated material. And in fact, when Wang Yi, Chinese foreign minister, visited Colombo last week, the Sri Lankans actually had to kowtow and pay back the amount for the fertilizer subsidy. Now, the point that a lot of people have asked is, yes, India has bailed them out. It is an emergency bailout. And yes, we have given, Sri Lanka has been asking India for a lot of assistance and cash assistance. The point is, India's assistance, is that going to be used to pay back Chinese debt? And that is a question which a lot of other people have been asking. So frankly, the best thing for Sri Lanka might well be to go to the IMF for a restructuring program. That is only on the economic side. On the strategic side, for instance, I can say, I don't think, obviously there has been no sort of quid pro quo on this, but it is interesting that Sri Lanka cleared the Trincomalee oil tank farms where India would operate 14 of those oil tank farms after decades of dithering and after decades of stalling that project. So it is interesting that Sri Lanka cleared that just about, say, 10 days before they got the bailout from India. What do you have to say about that, Mr. Tayab?
India and Sri Lanka have had a difficult strategic relationship. We all remember the LTTE and the IPKF, which was sent there and which had very tragic outcomes. And still the Sri Lankan Tamils are not getting a fair deal, and it is an issue which resonates very much with our Tamil people, and India cannot ignore that. Then there is a fisherman issue which comes up again and again. The Park Straits and Gulf of Mannar, our fishermen sometimes cross into the Sri Lankan waters, and their boats are seized and fishermen are seized, and that is a very difficult problem which needs to be resolved. And yes, Trincomalee was going on for almost 24 years of discussion, and with great difficulty now, because Sri Lankans have been under pressure and they want loans and credits from India. Their cabinet has announced that this agreement will go through and some tanks will be given to India. And also this whole issue of East Container Terminal in Colombo Port, where again China, it seems that Sri Lanka is going on the same path as Hambantota Port, and it will take $1.4 billion credit from Chinese companies, investments, etc., and give that 99-year lease, that container terminal. And in compensation, they are trying to give what they have offered, that the West Container Terminal of Colombo could be given to India, and India had formed a consortium with Japan. So there are many issues involved. The relationship is not very smooth. It is being managed. But as a bigger country, as a neighboring country, India needs to be more open-minded and more magnanimous, but be very watchful. We must draw our red lines very, very clearly, that what kind of Chinese ships, etc., submarines can come, not come in Hambantota Port and Colombo. And on that, we should take a very, very firm stand. As far as the economy is concerned, the two credit lines are for imports from India for food and fuel of $1.5 billion. But yes, the swap arrangement and deferment of loan could be used for paying back China, but this is only for 3 months. And after that, Indian government will watch very carefully how this loan of $912 million, 2 tranches, is being used.
I think the loan is actually, a lot of it will be in kind. I mean, in the sense that it's a line of credit. So they will have to buy it from Indian sources. And so it's in a sense, it is a loan, a sort of grant in kind, and it's an assistance in kind. But you said correctly about the fishermen and as well as the Chinese presence in the northern province. I mean, the Chinese ambassador was in Jaffna at a temple the other day. And I think Indians had successfully got the Chinese to back down from an energy project in the 3 islands of Jaffna, which are of security concern, of security importance to India. I think the Sri Lankan government finally asked the Chinese companies to not build a hybrid, what they called a hybrid energy project in those 3 islands. On the fishermen issue, of course, as you rightly said, Mr. Tayal, I think a lot of the fault lies with India and the Indian fishermen, because Indian fishermen are one of the few fishermen in the world that use the kind of deep trawling that is no longer used anywhere else, but largely because it interferes with the growth of marine life, but it is also very ecologically unfriendly. And so to that extent, a lot of the Sri Lankan Tamil fishermen have protested against Indian Tamil fishermen because they find that their livelihoods are being threatened by the kind of destructive fishing that Indian fishermen are doing. And I think that is something we also need to acknowledge, that it's not always that Sri Lanka is at fault. It is also where we should be, where we can, and as you rightly said, as a larger power, we should be more magnanimous, but we should also look inward and see how we can improve ourselves. I think we are slowly getting to the end of discussion, Mr. Tayal. Do you think you could tell us a little, sort of your last thoughts about how this relationship can be managed better?
China is the big elephant in the room. Foreign Minister Wang Yi was in Maldives and Sri Lanka just a few days back. China has designs on Indian Ocean. We have to treat Sri Lanka and Maldives in a very delicate diplomatic fashion. And as I said, we must draw our red lines very, very carefully and very, very clearly and insist of them. As you had mentioned, that in the northern parts of Chinese projects, ultimately they were not given to China. So it will be a continuous dialogue between India and Sri Lanka. And ultimately, the basis is that Indians have goodwill for Sri Lanka and the people of Sri Lanka. And people of Sri Lanka have a lot of goodwill for India because of the Buddhist connection, cultural connection, and civilizational connection. And ultimately, that will shore up this relationship. But the strategic part of it will need to be managed very carefully, because the current dispensation wants to leverage Chinese economic assistance, Chinese investment, which is their right to do. But they should make sure that it does not in any way impinge on India's security and strategic interests.
Thank you, Mr. Dayal.
This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
The Amar Jawan Jyoti flame at India Gate has been merged with the flame at the National War Memorial in New Delhi on Friday. The ceremony to merge the Amar Jawan Jyoti flame was presided over by the Chief of Integrated Defence Staff, Balabhadra Radhakrishna. India Gate was unveiled in 1931 and it was built to honour the 70,000 soldiers of British India who gave supreme sacrifice. The Amar Jawan Jyoti was set up after the 1971 Indo-Pak War. After a long wait and multiple considerations, the National War Memorial was built in the India Gate complex and was inaugurated in February 2019. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Modi has said a grand statue of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose will be installed at India Gate. In a series of tweets, Mr. Modi said this would be a symbol of India's indebtedness to him. He said till the grand statue of Netaji Bose is completed, a hologram statue of his would be present at the same place. Mr. Modi added that he will be unveiled the hologram statue on the 23rd of January, which is Netaji's birth anniversary. And moving on to sports, in badminton, two-time Olympic medalist PV Sindhu has entered the semi-final of the women's singles of Syed Modi International Tournament in Lucknow. She beat six-seeded Supanida Katetong of Thailand 11-21, 21-12, 21-17 in the quarterfinals Friday evening. Earlier, HS Pranoy lost to France's Arnaud Merkel in the men's quarterfinals. And in football, at the Africa Cup of Nations, defending champions Algeria crashed out of the tournament with 3-1 loss against Cote d'Ivoire. In cricket, South Africa beat India by 7 wickets in the second one-day international at Volcanic Park in Paarl tonight. Opting to bat first, the visitors made 287 runs for the loss of 6 wickets in stipulated 50 overs with the help of wicketkeeper Rishabh Pant's brilliant 85 runs of 71 balls and skipper KL Rahul's 55. For Proteas, Tabraiz Samshi picked up 2 wickets. In reply, the hosts overhauled the target for the loss of 3 wickets in 48.1 overs, riding on openers Janeman Mallon's 91 runs and Quinton de Kock's 78. With this, South Africa are leading the 3-match series by 2-0.
And now we bring you a report on the business world.
BSE Sensex plunged 427 points to close at 59,037. NSE Nifty also lost 140 points to settle at 17,617 points. Asian share markets plunged, tracking losses in the US equity markets. South Korea's Kospi declined by 1%, while Japan's Nikkei 225 and China's Shanghai Composite Index both tumbled 0.9%. Singapore's Straits Times Index ended flat, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng added 0.1%. European markets were also down in intraday trade. Oil prices fell after rising to 7-year highs this week as investors booked profits following a build-up in US crude and fuel inventories. In intraday trade, Brent crude was trading around $87 per barrel. Back home, gold prices fell by 30 rupees at the multi-commodity exchange for February contracts. The precious metal was trading at 48,350 rupees per 10 grams. Silver prices also plunged by 410 rupees to 64,970 rupees per kilogram for March contracts when reports last came in. And in the foreign exchange market, the rupee appreciated by 8 paise against the US dollar. The domestic unit was trading at 74 rupees and 43 paise against the US currency. Arjun Chaudhary for World News, All India Radio.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. New York Times reports that airstrikes by a Saudi-led military coalition on northern Yemen killed at least 70 people at a prison and knocked out the entire country's internet on Friday. The strikes came after Iran-backed Houthi rebels attacked the UAE, a key partner in the Saudi-led coalition that has been fighting in Yemen for years. And now let's take a look at what made the headlines in Nepal. The Himalayan Times writes that the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, has said that Nepal has made a significant progress in nutrition of mothers and children at risk due to current inequities and COVID-19 pandemic. And in some reports from the press on China, AFP reports that French Parliament has adopted a resolution denouncing China's Uyghur genocide. Taiwan News reports that a Chinese anti-submarine warfare plane entered Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone ADIZ on Thursday. Taiwan sent aircraft, broadcast radio warnings, deployed missile systems to track PLAA planes. And now, looking at the press reports from Afghanistan, Tolo News reported that European Union's Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell said that engagement with the Islamic Emirate is necessary, but added that it should be conditional.
A quick look at the headlines once again. India blocks 35 Pakistani YouTube channels and 2 websites for spreading anti-India fake and divisive content. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov meet in Geneva to discuss de-escalation in Ukraine. German frigate Bayern makes port call at Mumbai, signaling India-Germany partnership in the Indo-Pacific. Germany highlights fundamental differences with China on human rights in the first virtual meeting between the 2 foreign ministers. Private offices allowed to function with up to 50% attendance in Delhi. Amar Jawan Jyoti flame at India Gate merged with flame at the National War Memorial in New Delhi. In badminton, PV Sindhu enters women's singles semi-finals of the Syed Modi International Tournament in Lucknow. And in cricket, South Africa beat India by 7 wickets in the second ODI at Volcanic Park in Paarl. And now, before we end, let's listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Kenya.
Abhi
And with that, we end this edition. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.